We're going to start off today by going back to science class. Now, some of you, that's exciting. Some of you are already asleep. We're going to talk about a couple of scientific laws. These are the immutable things that govern our universe. God designed them, and they are the things that do not change. And whether or not you know it, you know some of these scientific laws. For example, you know about the law of gravity. What goes up must come down. It's a simple way of putting it to describe a very deeply complex idea, but basically that's what gravity says, is what goes up must come down. Or maybe you might remember the law of inertia. An object at rest tends to stay at rest, and an object in motion tends to stay in motion. Those are laws of our universe. Again, it's a simple explanation for something that books and books and books have been written about, but they simply tell us the laws that shape our understanding of this world. They give us a foundation on which to build out our understanding. In fact, gravity is always a thing. We can defy gravity temporarily, but it will always come back to it being the law. Inertia is always there no matter what we do. And because we can calculate them, because we can put numbers to these laws, then we can use them to explain other things. So that's how we can use gravity and inertia and all the other things that go with it to say, if I get on a plane in New York, I'm going to land in London at such a time, and it's going to take this much fuel, and the plane needs to be carrying this much weight, and et cetera, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, the two laws I want to talk about start off like that. They are laws of the universe that do not change, whether we want them to exist or not. They are super complex, but we can boil them down to just a couple of statements. These are the first two laws of what are called thermodynamics. Now, you hear thermo, you can think heat. A thermos keeps hot stuff hot. The thermostat will control the heat in a room. A thermometer will tell you how much heat is there. If it's cold out, you might wear some thermals under your clothes. Dynamics has to do with movement and the speed of movement. And these laws have to do with what happens when you get heat and movement together. So we can pare them down to a level that I can understand. So hopefully I can explain it in a way that you can understand it too. The first law of thermodynamics is also called the law of conservation of energy. And basically what it says is that all of the energy in the universe is all there ever was and all there ever will be. Because you cannot create energy and you can't destroy energy. So heat energy, everything that's there is what's always been, will always be, and you can't make more and you can't get rid of it. Now it can change form, it can do all kinds of things, but there will never be more than there was at the beginning, and there will never be less. Now the reason that's so important is because of the second law. The second law of thermodynamics says every time energy gets used, a tiny, tiny part of that energy gets changed into a form that can't ever be used again. So while we cannot destroy energy, we are very, very slowly losing the total amount of energy in the universe. You can think of that like the rechargeable battery in your phone. You can charge that battery up over and over and over again, but eventually you're going to start charging it and noticing it doesn't last quite as long. And over time it degrades and there's nothing you can do to really get it back except buy a new phone. So while we cannot destroy energy, we are very, very slowly moving to a point where everything comes to a halt. That there's not going to be any energy left because it all gets used up. This is also called the law of entropy. And if we wanted to simplify it even further, we might put it this way. This is the scientific law that says everything wears out. Now, you don't have to be a scientific genius to know the truth of that statement. Everything wears out. We've all experienced it in all kinds of ways throughout our lives. Doesn't matter how well you maintain your house, it's going to have problems that crop up now and then and need repair. Your car is going to wear out someday. And the more that you use things, the faster they degrade. I put on a shirt the other day, did not notice until it was too late. It was missing one of the buttons. Somehow a button had popped off. My job at Best Buy and my new role now both were predicated on the very fact that if you have an appliance in your house, it's eventually going to need repair. This whole entropy thing is one of those immutable laws of the universe, and nothing is exempt from this law. Everything eventually wears down, breaks down, gets replaced. Even you get to things like our cities and our nations, our entire planet. None of it is permanent. And we're not surprised by that. It's the reality that we have lived with for our entire lives. Everything wears out. It is a fundamental, observable, measurable, mathematical, scientific rule that cannot be broken. Then again, I started this whole series of sermons on the God of the impossible by defining a miracle as the time when God breaks his own rules. So today, that's exactly what we're going to see. We're going to look at a time when God, at least temporarily, broke this rule. In fact, we're going to look at a time that this miracle happened, and the people, the way it kind of words it, the people didn't even know it was happening. It's a miracle that we don't usually spend a lot of time on. And the reason that we don't do that is because it gets mentioned in a passage. It's mentioned 3 times in the Bible, but all 3 times it's mentioned in a passage that's dealing with much bigger things. So when we're looking at those things, those are the things we focus on, and we just kind of pass over this little miracle. And it's often gets mentioned along with so many other things that we really don't see it. But with the intention of this series being one of encouragement, I thought this was one of great benefit to just stop and examine, because again, miracles are more than just grand shows. They're not God saying, look what I can do. Miracles are there to accomplish something. And one of the things they accomplish is they give us a little glimpse of the reality behind the curtain. We get to see the proof of who God really is, his personality, the type of person he is. So the 10 plagues, for example, they did have the purpose of rescuing the enslaved Israelites. But through them, we also see a God who took a stand for injustice and would not abide worship of anything other than himself. The healing of Naaman last week benefited Naaman, of course, but we also see a God who is able to best any foe and is no respecter of persons. And today, we're going back to Moses and the Israelites, but much later in the story. Let's set the stage. After their departure from Egypt, the 10 plagues have happened, they have crossed the Red Sea, and they end up in the desert of the Negev. And they're going to be led on a roundabout path toward a home that God has promised them. Now, there is a shortcut they could have taken and gotten there much quicker, but God didn't lead them that way. And there are reasons for that. That's a whole other sermon. But God takes them on a roundabout journey that over time will lead them to this home that he's been promising them. And he's told them over and over again, I have prepared a land for you. You're headed to a home. You're not going to have to build houses when you get there. You're not going to have to plant gardens because they're already there. I've already promised it to you. I will give it to you. But then when they arrived, they sent in spies into the land to check it out. 12 spies left, and 12 spies came back with their reports, and it was a beautiful land, one that would be great to live in. The crops are good. It is plentiful, but there's just one little problem. 10 of the spies said This land is already occupied with enemies who are way too big for us. They're where it's impossible for us to go in and take this land away. Now, two of the spies disagreed. Joshua and Caleb, they said, we can go in with God's help. We're going to be just fine. But the people were afraid. And because they were afraid, they stopped trusting God and they stopped going forward. And this led to a time of punishment. God sentenced them to walk in circles until they died. That's kind of a silly way to say it, but that was the punishment. None of them, except for the two trusting spies and maybe some of the priesthood, none of them would get to go into the land that God had promised. They had to wander the desert until the last of them died. It took 40 years of wandering for that to happen. I've always wondered, they kept track of all the people that were the right age. I've always wondered about that last one. That last person that was left. They know once this person dies, we finally get to get out of punishment. Did they feed him extra salt in his diet just to make it go quicker? We're just waiting on you. But 40 years wandering in a desert. But then it was time. And before the people began their journey into this new home, Moses takes the time to make sure they know everything they need to know. Because this is a whole new generation. This isn't the generation that saw all the stuff that happened in Egypt, or if they did, they were very young when it happened. This is a new group of people that are going to go into this land that God has prepared for them. And he wants them to know everything they need to know because he doesn't get to go in with them either. That's the entire premise of the book of Deuteronomy. And that's where we're going to be. You can turn there if you like. We're going to be toward the end of the book of Deuteronomy. Now, Deuteronomy is Moses making sure this new generation of Israelites knows where they came from, knows what their parents went through, and knows what God expects of them in this new land. They go through a ceremony where Moses outlines for them, if you stray away from God, you're going to get punished. And there's a whole chapter of here's all the curses that'll come on you if you stray away from God. If you stay faithful, here's all the blessings. There's a whole chapter of blessings that God says, if you stay on my side, I will bless you. And the people all commit to this in this grand ceremony of we're on God's side, and whatever God says, we will do. And then Moses begins his last words to the people. So we're going to be in Deuteronomy chapter 29. Chapter 29, and we're going to start in verse 1. It says, these are the words of the covenant that the Lord commanded Moses to make with the people of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant that he made with them at Horeb. And Moses summoned all Israel, said to them, you have seen all the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh, to all of his servants, to all his land, the great trials that your eyes saw, the signs and those great wonders. But to this day, the Lord has not given you a heart to understand, eyes to see, or ears to hear. I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes have not worn out on you. Your sandals have not worn off your feet. You have not eaten bread, and you have not drunk wine or strong drink, that you may know that I am the Lord, your God. Now, did you catch it? Did you see the miracle? Verses 2 and 3 mention the 10 plagues, that huge spectacle of their escape from Egypt. Verse 6 talks about God's miraculous providence in the desert with the gift of manna. But did you notice the miracle in verse 5? For 40 years, in constant use, in some of the harshest environments, while they were in the middle of being punished for their cowardice, Moses says their shoes and their clothes did not wear out. Nehemiah adds one other little detail to this in Nehemiah 9:21. It says, for 40 years you sustained them in the wilderness. They lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, nor did their feet become swollen. And Moses mentioned this at the beginning of Deuteronomy 2. So there was a health aspect to this as well. Their feet didn't swell up in this harsh environment. Now, compared to Nile turning to blood, frogs, gnats, flies, darkness, etc., compared to Naaman dunking himself in the river and coming out clean, that might not seem like much. And if we compare it to all the other things that happened during those 40 years, food from heaven every day, snake bites that were cured when you looked up at a snake on a pole, the ground opening up and swallowing people, Aaron's rod budding and then flowering in one night, battles with armies that they had no right winning, but they won the victory anyway. And with all these spectacular sights, it's easy to look over this little miracle here. And it kind of seems like the way that it's worded, the people kind of looked it over too. Didn't notice it was happening. But it shows us so much about our God. Now let's be clear here. We're talking about estimates of at least a couple million people, probably more, wearing clothes that were made either out of animal or plant products. These were not made to last. They're definitely not lasting 40 years. Today, we've got all kinds of synthetics and plastics and rubbers and things that are meant to endure, but I still have to replace my main set of shoes at least probably once a year. This is not Moses talking about a normal occurrence. God did this. And I want to ask the question, why? Why did God do this miracle? Clothes aren't the hardest things to procure or to make. There were people in Israel that were gifted with all kinds of artistic ability. We see that with the building of the tabernacle. They could have made clothes for them when they wore out. There was plenty of resources for them to do so. I wouldn't go so far as to say it was an unnecessary miracle, but also if God hadn't done this, they would have survived just fine. So what was the purpose of the miracle? What does it tell us about God, and why should we care in 2024? Well, we could start with the obvious. It tells us that God is a providing God. He continually fed them with manna so they would not starve. He prevented their clothes and their shoes from wearing out. Both of those things show us just how God provides, and to take it a little deeper, how he provides the little necessary things. I mean, sure, he was there when the enemy nations attacked. Many times they were defeated in giant, spectacular fashion. He did what we would call big miracles many times during those 40 years, but he also took care of the smaller daily necessities. And in order for him to provide the little things, you know what that means? It means he saw their daily little necessities. All through Scripture, we see the big, majestic things that our big, majestic God does. And sometimes we get lulled into the trap of only giving God credit for the big and the majestic. And there's nothing wrong with giving God the glory for the gigantic feats that he has done. But let's also remember the little provisions. Think of the times in Scripture that God provided and it wasn't a spectacle. A couple of weeks ago, we mentioned Hagar, the handmaiden of Sarah that Abraham had a child with. When she was mistreated, she ran away into the wilderness. Should have been a death sentence. She should never have made it as far as she did. And this wasn't even the son that God had promised Abraham. Seems like a problem that fixes itself. But she met up with the angel of the Lord at a spring of water, and he gave her a promise of what her future held. And it was there that God was shown through the name the God who sees. Jesus even pointed this. He once taught, which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? Now just contemplate that idea for a second. God knows the things that we need and the gifts that he can give us even in those small terms. The daily bread, the meals we eat. He's paying attention to the cosmic orbits of planets and stars that you and I have never seen, and yet he knows how to give those good gifts even at the minuscule level. Jesus even taught us to pray for the everyday needs. In the model prayer, he clearly tells us, pray for your daily bread, the little needs that we have. Another thing this little miracle shows us about God is that he provides even when we don't deserve it. The miracle of the clothes and the shoes not wearing out happened to people who were in the middle of a harsh, deserved punishment. They were working out their sentence for the fact that they were so unbelieving in God's power that they would not go into the land that God had already said, I've already given it to you. They had plenty of evidence to believe him. All those huge miracles that these people had seen with their own eyes. So God said, if you won't go in, that's fine. But I'm not going to let you in from this point on. But the manna still came. The clothes and the shoes didn't wear out. He still took care of them during those 40 years. See, this tells me I don't have to come to God as a perfect child in order to get taken care of. I don't have to be the model follower. I'm not facing a father like some people have that says, well, if you don't come to me with straight A's, you don't deserve what I give you. If I don't come as a model person, I don't lose my provision privileges. And that's a very good thing. And that says so much about our God. Go back to the very beginning. Adam and Eve. One rule. One Bible verse they had to memorize. And they broke it. They brought sin and death into the world. One of the greatest sins that ever happened. God's going to curse them. Cast them out of paradise. But do you remember what he does right before that? They had realized they were naked and tried to cover their shame with leaves, and God made them better clothing. Robes of animal skin, so they wouldn't be exposed to the elements. Now, we can go back in there and we can think of theological reasons for that and say it points ahead to certain things, and it does. But just think of the simple fact that this is God caring even for the sinner. You can't go out dressed like that. Let me give you something better. Again, Cain and Abel offer their sacrifices, and Cain's offering isn't what God required. Cain goes off to pout, and you remember what God told him? Even though he hadn't done it right, God comes to him and says this. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what's right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Now, the interesting thing about this passage is the word for sin there is the same word as the word for sin offering. And so this could very well be read, there's a sin offering at your door. Cain, if you open your door, there's a lamb there. You could come and do it right. All you have to do is go out and bring me the right offering and we're all good. Jesus said it very plainly in Matthew chapter 5. He starts talking about this concept of loving your enemies. Pray for those who hurt you so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and good, sends rain to the righteous and the unrighteous. In other words, do you want to be like God? Do good even for those who act against you. His sun and his rain, and in the context there, those are both blessings. They come to those who deserve it and come to those who don't. See, God takes care of, he provides for even the ones he punishes. The people, with a couple exceptions, had rejected him, but he still did not leave them. Another observation we could make from this little miracle. God provides not only because he loves us, and that is definitely a motivation, but he also provides so that we will know something, so that we will know he is God. We mentioned this on the sermon on the definition of a miracle, but one of the reasons miracles happen, and a lot of times in Scripture this is mentioned right alongside the miracle, is so that the one who sees or experiences the miracle will know he is God. There will be no mistaking that the origin of this supernatural occurrence could only be from God himself. Now, the word there that we translate know, you will know that I am the Lord your God, is an interesting one because it's primarily used in the sense of an experiential knowing. There are two ways to know something. There's an intellectual knowledge and there's an experiential knowledge. Here's the difference. Let's say you find out you have a brain tumor. Now, it's not a super serious one. It's one that can be surgically removed. Now, I could read a book on how to perform brain surgery. I could read every book on how to perform brain surgery. I could witness the best surgeons on the planet for a year. I could tell you the ins and outs of what your brain is and does and what it would take to surgically repair your brain. I could have all the intellectual knowledge in the world, but I bet you'd still choose those other surgeons over me when it came time for the surgery. Why? Because they've actually done it. They've got the experience of practice. That's the difference between intellectual and experiential knowledge. And here God says, I led you through the wilderness. I made sure you didn't go hungry. I saw that your shoes and your clothes wouldn't wear out. And all that happened so that you would experience for yourselves that I am the God I say I am. So you would know me. So that you would know that I care. And if you still happen to have that passage open, I want you to see something. In that passage, the way he describes himself is, I want them to see that I am the Lord, all capital letters, your God. The word, therefore, Lord, is that personal name God gave us. The one we really don't know how to pronounce, but our best guess is something like Jehovah or Yahweh. This is the name of God that he told Moses at the burning bush when he said, tell them, I am sent you. Not I was, not I will be, I am. The eternally present God who is always, has always been, and always will be. The word God there is the word Elohim. That's the creator God, the mighty God, the one who is the very definition of power. And put those together in context, when we see those words together, it's saying, I did these things so that you would know I'm the one that's always around, I always see, and I have enough power to take care of you. Once a young woman brought home her fiancé to meet her parents. And after dinner, her mother told her father, go take him in the other room, find out about him. So the father invited the fiancé to his study for a drink and said, what are your plans? And the young man said, I'm a scholar. Scholar, that's admirable, but what will you do to provide a nice house for my daughter to live in as she is accustomed to? I will study, and God will provide. Well, how will you buy her a beautiful engagement ring like she deserves? I will concentrate on my studies. God will provide. Well, and what about children? How will you support your children? Don't worry, sir. God will provide. And the conversation proceeded like that. And each time the father questioned, the young man would say, I'm going to study and God will provide. And later that evening, the mother asked, well, how'd it go? He said, he has no job, he has no plans, and he thinks I'm God. There is some truth to trusting in the fact that God will provide, that God will take care of you. He is absolutely powerful enough and present enough to know what you need and to provide that for you. So what does all of this mean for you and I today? As far as I know, God has not provided this miracle for me or any of you. Our clothes do wear out. I got a pair of shoes at home with holes in them. And we see the evidence of entropy all around us every day. So what can we take home from this Old Testament miracle? We'll definitely remember that God is still a providing God. We may never know all the little times in life that his provision made our lives easier or more bearable. But I bet you can think of some times when God provided for you and think back to those. Remember that God provides even when we mess up. And we do mess up, don't we? But God has not given up on us yet, even when we give up on him. When we make mistakes and we fall down. Too many have a picture of a God that's just waiting in the background for us to fall short, just so he can punish us and point at us and go, see, I told you couldn't do it. Some of us have known people like that. They see him as the one who points out our every flaw as a big disappointment. You know, we have an accuser, but it's not God. There's a book that was popular in the early 2000s that was made into a movie. It was called The Shack. Some of you might have read it. It's a pretty decent book. It's got some definite theological problems. I wouldn't look to it for real answers, but there is a scene in it where the main character gets to talk to God, and God tells him something that is pretty profound and something that every Christian really needs to chew on. He says, you cannot disappoint God. Do you think that's wrong? Do you think about all those times in life that you've disappointed him? Well, think about it. In order to be disappointed, you have to expect something and then get let down. I know what you're thinking. I let God down all the time. True, but you have never surprised God by doing so. He always knew that you were going to fall down at that point. He was already prepared for the next steps, whatever it takes to help you get rid of that sin. You can't catch God off guard. And so what that means is God knows how many times you failed him. He knows how many more times you're going to fail him in the future. And he still hasn't abandoned you. Meditate on that when you're feeling guilty. Also remember that he's still the Lord our God. He is still the ever-present creator of this universe that also sees you in the midst of whatever you're going through. One more thing to remember, something to keep in the forefront of your mind. The entire concept of our Christian hope is based on the fact that God is capable of breaking the rules of thermodynamics. We're not putting hope in the fact that our clothes aren't going to wear out, that our shoes won't fall apart. We're putting hope in a land that we're journeying to that corruption never touches, that sickness isn't welcome. Sin has to take a hike and everything stays perfect forever. That's the end goal for us. Heaven is the ultimate manifestation of this little overlooked miracle. And all it takes to get there is to come to him on his terms, to meet him at his cross and realize that our sin put him there and that we want to remove that from our lives, to see his goodness and his glory, and let our words and our lives display that truth to anyone who can hear or see us, to follow him into his grave through the waters of baptism and rise up with him out of that grave into a new life, and a life where we now have hope. A hope in a land where, as Jesus put it, moth and rust don't corrupt. Thieves don't break in and steal. And best of all, we get to be in the presence of the one who saved us. See, that's the ultimate manifestation of that little miracle in the book of Deuteronomy. And it all begins at the cross. It's like the song says that we're about to sing. There is still room at the cross for those who are willing to come. And it's either our job to look at that and say, I need to go meet him there, or it's our job to go say, I need to go help other people meet him there. And in either case, I need to go there. I need to see again what was done for my salvation. I need to be reminded of the miracle that happened there. But also I need to be reminded of the miracle that's yet to come. Because I met him at the cross, I get to meet him in the uncorruptible heaven. Let's stand and sing.